I think they would tell you, no, it wasn't the solution, and they didn't expect it to be the solution, but it was the best they could get at that particular moment. The next administration will have a lot more work.
Well, I share the same high regard for Barney Frank as you do. Back when I was volunteering in aid services back in the 1980s, I remember I was at the time I was the volunteer director of the Cape Cod AIDS Council, and we were trying to get people with AIDS, with advanced AIDS, eligible, and trying to get them to apply to the Cape Cod Housing Authority for Section 8 certificates, and they were being denied because they were being told basically that AIDS put them in a transitional housing status, that they were literally transitioning from life to death. And so Barney Frank worked very hard to remove that restriction, and now people with AIDS qualify as just another class of disabled people. And Barney Frank, as Senator Ted Kennedy, really went to bat on this issue, and their response was immediate and effective, and they rock. But I will say this much about Barney Frank and also Chris Dodd. I know a number of their staffers on their respective committees, and I will tell you this much, and I've been on the story for over a year. If a year ago you had put a gun to Barney Frank's head and tell me all you know about credit default swaps, I don't think he could have given you more than 3 paragraphs. There is so much about this market, about the subterranean nature of this market, the shadow banking system, what collateralized mortgage obligations, collateralized debt obligations, structured investment vehicles, the $62 trillion market. That's notational value, of course, but it still has a settlement value of some $2 trillion that was written just on Fannie and Freddie debt. Went unrecognized for so long. Why were these guys so ignorant?
Well, because lobbies were writing the bills. And in the case of the deregulation of basically the legalization, legitimation of credit default swaps, the bill was put into the appropriations bill as a rider in December of 2000, just as Congress was desperate to get out of town in the wake of Bush v. Gore, by Phil Gramm. Phil Gramm, who was until a few weeks ago the co-chairman of the McCain campaign.
And currently the vice chairman of UBS, I might add.
Currently the vice chairman of UBS. And Michael Greenberger, who you may know and may have talked to, is a former official of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and a professor of law now, accused Gramm basically of opening up this enormous speculative loophole, and which basically meant that these financial instruments, the credit default swaps, were treated as though they were commercial players in futures markets rather than financial players, and therefore not subject to the limits that the CFTC would impose on speculators. And Gramm called him up in his home or his office and was chewing him out for claiming that he had not in fact done this. And Greenberger concluded that Gramm simply didn't know what was in his own bill, which is perfectly plausible. That the bills, in fact, the method of operating of that Congress and that leadership was to take what the lobbies wanted them to do, put it into law in the dark of night, try to avoid the normal legislative process, public scrutiny, get these things, get what the industry wanted. And unfortunately, when that happens, the industry tends to go whole hog. You get a speculative environment that's totally out of control. And it's almost inevitable that at some point you're going to have to pay the piper, that there will be a collapse.
Phil and Wendy Gramm, you want to mention that partnership?
Well, Wendy Gramm, of course, was a commissioner of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, and then she went on to be a director and on the audit committee of Enron. And it was Phil Gramm who opened up the so-called Enron loophole in the commodity markets, which deregulated electronic trading in energy futures, making it possible for Enron to convert itself from a rather humdrum utility pipeline company into thing that thought it was and sold the world on being the creator of some great new market in energy futures. And of course, the rest was history. And Ron rose to the skies like Icarus, got too close to the sun, melted, and crashed.
You know, we'll get to your book and this new class of predators and the predator state in a second. I'm not through with Fannie and Freddie yet, and you're such a great resource in that area, so I'm going to mine as much as I can from you on that. But I did want to say that the Grahams, Phil and Wendy Graham, probably, in my opinion, lead the pack of in the new predator state. My editor and I are going to go forward with doing an article on Phil Graham, and we hope it runs in the Alternative Weekly Press before the election. But I used to work for UBS, and I'm trying to get some guidelines from them on what they call disparagement. They don't want to be disparaged, and you know, what is it going to be the fine line between disparaging, you know, Phil Graham and fair and accurate reporting? That's what I want to know, because almost everything about the guy is evil.
I'll tell you a little story. I got a call from some very brave students who were interning at UBS this summer, and they had been given the assignment of preparing a presentation for the top leadership, chair and vice chair, on the question why Barack Obama would be a better president for the financial sector and the economy than John McCain. And I said it's very simple. In an Obama administration, former Senator Phil Graham will have no influence at all. Yeah. And I don't know whether they reported that back to to Graham himself.
Well, he's going to be hearing from us, and he will, and you know, in my article and in any shows that we do on him, he will have the opportunity to defend himself. I mean, we'll put a call into his flack and say, do you want to be on the show? Or, you know, when we do the newspaper article, do you have any comment? We'll submit questions to him or interview him in whatever way. You know, he'll get his chance, but you know, this Enron loophole is just so gaping huge, and it's just sucking the life force out of our country.
I think it's important to recognize that for a figure like Graham, doing what he doesn't distinguish between doing